Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Go ahead and get started then. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Deadpoolzilla.
Hello everyone.
And the Comics Kid 2099, aka the most delicious Geeky Gentleman, Ruben DeBoard.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. You all want to take a bite of the Reuben sandwich.
Oh yeah. Or Ruben, I don't know, how's this work? There's three of us, so we can do a sandwich. And then Ruben's in there somewhere. So it's like, is Ruben the meat of the sandwich, or would Ruben be the bread of the Ruben sandwich? I don't know. We're really going to think this out for our Geeky Gentlemen / fictions. Anyway, no, tonight we're discussing the first three X-Men movies. And so as often happens, at least with me, and I'd like to think this is a pretty normal thing for other people, as often happens, I've been talking to Ruben a lot lately, and Ruben's a big X-Men fan, and so whenever he talks about X-Men, I go, oh wow, that's really interesting, and it just puts me in a certain mood to, read or consume some X-Men. And, we've never talked about these movies on this channel before, because, I don't know, the channel started in the show Geeky Gentlemen started in 2012, and, I don't know, just never felt like talking about any of the new X-Men movies. It's been 6 years since the last movie we're going to talk about tonight, so I don't know, it just feels like an appropriate time to revisit the original three X-Men films. The first two, of course, directed by Bryan Singer, the third directed poorly by Brett Ratner, and these films have a interesting, important, and weird place in the, comic book superhero movie onslaught that now consumes the Hollywood machine. So yeah, should be an interesting discussion. I was trying to think of a good place to start, and I guess sorry if you guys can hear fireworks going off in the background. I guess a good place to start, though, would be...
Are you under attack?
Yes. They've come for me. They know I'm hiding mutants. A good place to start with these, though, seems to me would be the idea of where you think they stand in the annals of the superhero movie. Like, what role do you think they play in that history book?
Oh wow. Okay. I think that. Oh, go ahead. I think that it's pretty important as far as historically. You look at the early 2000s, that's really when superhero movies started coming out just really fast. And some of those early ones, not great. I think the first two X-Men movies are pretty solid. And I think the success of these two movies and the success of the first two Spider-Man movies, I'm almost going to say we wouldn't have the superhero movies that we have now if these four movies together hadn't been as huge as they are. Mm-hmm. So I would say they are pretty important, at least in the superhero landscape that we have now with movies.
Okay. How about you, Deadpoolzilla?
Well, I like to compare these three movies in particular, like anticipation for a disappointing roller coaster. It's like, aw.
Yeah.
But I agree with Ruben. Had we not have at least the first two X-Men films, we probably wouldn't be where we are now. And that same goes for the first two Spider-Man films, which is also kind of funny because very disappointing end for trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, the thing that I find interesting, since both of you brought up the Spider-Man comparison, well, I still like the Raimi movies and the first two in particular. I don't think they really hold up. I think that the Raimi movies kind of created the superhero movie formula to a certain extent that we've been trying to break out of for a long time, and I think is maybe finally dead. I think they're like more important than they are really good on their own. Whereas I think the X-Men movies stand out because, again, the first two really helped, found the genre, but yet maintain as really good movies in their own right, in a way that Spider-Man doesn't. Like, I feel like Spider-Man 1 and 2 are decent, but they don't necessarily hold up to modern criticism because they are pretty formulaic as far as just like, okay, how do we, in the most bare bones way, do a superhero origin possible? Like, I feel like they don't hold up to, modern criticism. They almost don't work if you didn't grow up with them. Whereas X-Men, you could have never seen these movies before. Like, I'm certain there are kids today, like 15, 16-year-olds, that for whatever reason never saw any of the first three X-Men movies, and that they could see them today and they'll be just as impactful as they were when they came out. So that's kind of where I think the first two at least stand in a historical context. The third one has an interesting place because while it, like Spider-Man 3, is unequivocally a failure, it's a failure in a very different way than Spider-Man 3 and almost reflects a lot of the problems that the DCEU and the early MCU had, which is trying too hard to set up some kind of big sequel-y mess of a thing.
Oh, you mean trying to do the beginning of the Joss Whedon run, mix it with the Dark Phoenix saga? Can't imagine how that would fail.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So, I don't know, I was trying to think of good ways to do this episode since we're reviewing three movies. And honestly, we're about 10 minutes in, or not even. We're a couple minutes in, and we've kind of given a really, really general overview of the franchise. And I think the best thing to do would be to break this video up into essentially three parts and just talk about one movie for about half an hour each.
Yeah.
You guys cool with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We'll try our best to keep comparisons to the future films to the end, the last 10 minutes or so of discussion of each movie. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it and start talking about X1. This one, on a rewatch, I was really surprised by because I remember thinking about it in the same terms as I did the Raimi Spider-Man of it was good and important for its time, but it doesn't necessarily hold up, and I completely throw that out on rewatch. I think this movie holds up fantastically over 10 years later.
Yeah. I will agree with that it doesn't feel dated, whereas the Raimi films, like the more I watch the Raimi, especially Spider-Man 1 and 2, I like Spider-Man 1 and 2, but at the same time I'm like, man, why didn't you just set this in the 60s? Because you clearly wanted to do that, Raimi. But here, these feel timeless, the themes feel timeless. Everyone in here is just a hit after hit with this cast, and I think it's a strong intro. It's a strong intro for, what the X-Men cast was for another movie.
I think I had not necessarily the opposite reaction. I've always liked this movie, and I still really enjoyed it this time. But this time, watching it, it was the first time that it occurred to me not a whole lot happens in this movie. You get 2 acts into this movie, and basically you've just met all of your characters, and Rogue has run away from the mansion. Like, the plot stuff kind of happens in Act 3, and don't get me wrong, I still really like this movie, but I was just watching this time, I was realizing how very little actually happens, and how you get, to the end of Act 2, and still not a whole lot has happened. But I still really enjoyed it, and I don't know how you would introduce this entire world and all of these characters in one movie. Like, you almost have to do an entire movie where you're just introducing all the characters and kind of keep it plot light, and then do all your big heavy plot stuff in future movies. So I don't think that I'm even chastising this movie for doing that, but this was the first time I really realized it.
Yeah. But to be fair, I would say that, it's not too far away from how the animated series started, with having Jubilee being the one to be the eyes going in. They do the same thing with Rogue, but on a bigger scale.
Mm-hmm.
And the X-Men comics are known for that. The very first issue, Jean Grey comes to the school, and she's basically saying, hey, what is this place? And then the Dark Phoenix saga introduces Kitty Pryde, and she's your eyes in. So they do that every now and then. Every 10 years or so, they'll introduce a new POV character. So that, I'm totally down with that, them doing that with Wolverine and Rogue here.
Yeah. For me, what was interesting about this is I've seen this movie multiple times. I know for a fact. I remember seeing it when it first came out in the theaters, and I'd seen it on TV over the years, but I'd never really sat down and watched the whole thing on its own with critical eyes. And so I was just really impressed by how many really smart choices are made in this. To go straight to the conclusion, the big epic battle at the end takes place on Ellis Island. On Liberty Island, and is about the leaders of the world being on Ellis Island. That's incredibly interesting. Ruben and I have talked about this a little bit, where the X-Men definitely have some parallels to, or definitely have a lot of parallels to the experience of the minority, whether that be someone that's Black, Hispanic, Eastern European. Gay,
that was
what have you.
For the comic, though.
Well, no, not necessarily, though, because Stan Lee is not a very smart writer. And so a lot of the old comics don't really write the X-Men with that level of commentary that way. But this movie really jumps on and attaches it to it. So to be telling the X-Men story in the first movie, very particularly comparing it to the immigrant story, is really, really interesting, and it grounds that minority viewpoint kind of thing, and it does so in the big epic comic book way by having the whole thing set on Liberty Island by the end. I think that's really, really interesting, and there's a lot of imagery to this too that really helps lend itself to that. I mean, you have again the migration across the country. That's a big element of it. You have scenes that are on trains. You have scenes that are kind of in the wilderness, crossing the countryside. A lot of that sense of the migrant story and the persecuted migrant really does kind of play up in this movie, just as visual storytelling. And I'd never really taken the time to consider and think about that before. So.
And I would think that equates to Bryan Singer, because he is gay. So I think he wanted to really push that home, because he does feel that kind of persecution as well, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that becomes more evident in the second movie. But again, we'll hold off for a while. So I don't know, that whole aspect really stood out to me. The debates that Xavier and Magneto are having in this movie, really, really well handled. And again, the scene with Senator Kelly, all of his stuff is just fantastic. The way they talk about, the way he talks about mutants, and the scene in the helicopter with Mystique is probably my favorite scene in the movie.
Oh wow!
It's so good. It's got so many things working for it. Where he's just sitting there talking about how disgusted he is by mutants, how he's going to save the country. It's going to be people like him that save the country, and then Mystique transforms and kicks the shit out of him. And as she's about to knock him out, she says, "It's people like you that made me afraid to go to school when I was a child." Mm-hmm. And that's just so on point for a lot of the messages that the movie's playing with, and I really like it.
Yeah, it's a good scene, and it's one of those things that while Senator Kelly's opinions are very deplorable, you can also see kind of where he's coming from because he's kidnapped by mutants and they effectively kill him with their mad science ray. And yeah, he's racist against mutants, but then they kind of prove him right, like he says later on. He says, "Whatever you do to me, you'll prove me right," and then they do. And Magneto, he doesn't know that he's going to be killing all these people, but his behavior plays right into what people like Senator Kelly accuse all mutants of being of. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing.
That's interesting. I don't necessarily agree with it, because, of course, especially by the time you get to the second movie, but, like, it's pretty evident that Senator Kelly is creating the persecution that Magneto is afraid is going to lead to the downfall of mutants. And, you know, again, to go to that opening scene in Auschwitz is absolutely incredible way to ground where this movie's come from. And it gives you a really great sense of why Magneto thinks the way he does. And it's so simple what it has to do, and maybe it's just the time that I'm watching this, you know, the whole idea of families being separated being really prevalent in the public consciousness you know, in June of 2018. It does so little to show you just how much of an effect, how emotionally invested Magneto as a character is in these kinds of issues when it comes to separations and persecutions. That, like, I guess the thing that impresses me the most, though, about Magneto and his whole point in this film is he's kind of trying to meet Charles halfway. Like, his whole argument is, tomorrow, our problems will be the leaders of the world's problems. And that's really, really interesting to me. That's probably my favorite Magneto plot that I've read or seen anywhere.
Yeah, and there's a cut scene that was deleted from this movie, and on the one hand, I can see why they cut it because it totally like breaks the pace of the movie. It's right when Charles is explaining to Wolverine what the school is. There's a scene where Storm is teaching the class that Rogue is in, and it's about Constantine forcing the Romans to convert to Christianity, and that's a perfect parallel to what Magneto's doing here, where he's trying to force humanity to convert to being mutants. And so I wish that scene had stayed in the movie, even though I know why they cut it, because it really kind of breaks the whole pace. But I agree with you. It's Magneto doing what he feels is necessary, which is, you know, what he says at the end of the movie. But he's doing it in such a way where he feels like the less bloodshed, the better at this point. Like, as far as he knows, this machine is harmless. It's going to turn people into mutants, and then they're not going to be persecuting anymore. And so it'll be a perfect world once everybody's a mutant, or at least once all the leaders of the world are mutants. And so I like that too. It's a progression. We're not seeing him instantly go into like trying to annihilate humanity. He's taking baby steps to doing that, I guess.
Deadpoolzilla, you've been quiet.
I would say that that is a good point that Ruben brings up. What I also find interesting about this is that with this film is that you have this dichotomy between Xavier and Magneto, and what I love about it, especially with the scenes between them, especially, you can't really decide who's really right here. You know, you can't really point and say, you know, Xavier's right or Magneto's right, because there's pros and cons to both, and that's how I really like that kind of dichotomy when it's handled well, because there's no right answers here.
Yeah, yeah. And I've said this about the X-Men movies before, but God, they cast Magneto and Professor X perfectly. Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart bring so much gravitas to this show, to these films, just on the strength of their performances. It is absolutely stunning seeing them work on screen together. They foil each other fantastically in all three of these films, but X1 probably the best because they get the most screen time together, and that's really, really cool to see how it all plays out. Now, one thing that I'd forgotten about this movie, and I do feel is maybe a little weaker, I'd originally thought that for some reason Rogue was needed because only her powers could convert someone permanently or something like that. I don't know where I got that in my head from. But ultimately, Rogue's purpose here is so Magneto can give his powers to Rogue so she can convert everyone and it won't kill him. And you know, that's probably to me the weakest element because
it's really convoluted.
Yeah, but it also paints Magneto as not necessarily buying what he's selling. In a way that kind of bugs me because, you know, Wolverine even has the line where he's like, if you had even an ounce of courage, it'd be you in that machine, or an ounce of integrity, something like that. It'd be you in that machine, not her. And that's a really good point. There's like really no reason besides Magneto just being a bit of a bullshit artist, which I don't like that characterization, that particular aspect of the characterization, for him not to be, you know, sacrificing himself for his vision. And also, yeah, there's the contrivance of just like, why does it have to be Magneto? Why can't it be literally any mutant?
Yeah. And I'd say they weren't thinking about it in terms of Magneto. I don't think they were thinking about his character necessarily and the integrity or lack thereof. I think they were mostly thinking of, we have to come up with some plot point that's going to cause the X-Men to clash with Magneto. So he kidnaps one of their new students and is going to use her to turn everyone into mutants, and it's going to kill her, and so they have to rescue her. Like, anything less, and, you know, is there any reason for the X-Men to clash with Magneto? And so I think that was what they were thinking of, and I think that it more or less painted them into a corner by turning Magneto into someone who's full of himself and isn't necessarily, like you said, doesn't believe what he's selling, or does believe but doesn't believe enough that he's willing to risk his life. I don't think that they realized what they were doing until they got so far into this plot that they kind of realized what they had done.
Yeah, that's the thing for me, and maybe that's why I had it in my head that like Rogue was necessary to operate the machine properly. Because to me that just would make more sense, and it'd be more consistent, I feel, with Magneto's character throughout the movie. Because, again, I want to try to avoid talking about the other films, but that is only a moment that ever feels in character for Magneto in the third movie. And that's the one where I would say is the most out of character at points. So, I don't know, it's a bit of a mess. But that it's just a weird inconsistency I ultimately come down on it with, but just something worth thinking about. Let's talk a little bit about, Wolverine's character arc here, because he gets some interesting stuff to do in this film, I think. Ultimately Wolverine became the star of the X-Men film franchise in a way that I think a lot of people were surprised by. To the point where, what is it? It's not till, First Class that we get a movie that's not got Wolverine in the center stage, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, what do you think it is about Wolverine that's done here that made him such an interesting character to focus so heavily on? Because from what I understand in the books, he's an important character, but he's not the main character of the book or anything.
I don't know. I think they nail his character. I think, a lot of people complain that Hugh Jackman is too tall, but he does the character well. In the same way that you mentioned Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, I think that Hugh Jackman does a really great job with the character of Wolverine. I think it's a
little different for me.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I thought Ruben was done. I must have.
No,
cut
yeah,
in.
yeah. I'm done. Go ahead.
It's a little different for me for Hugh Jackman because I do look back at X1 and I'm like, man, it is very rough at points. With I don't think I was like, yeah, I can see him as Wolverine now until X2. That's where I feel like he really got the character down this time. But the first time, like, you can see he's trying, and this was one of his first major films, so I can. It's understandable.
What about the character? What about the performance isn't coming through to you with Wolverine then?
I think they didn't know what to do with him because they were like, well, we got this big arc to do with Wolverine, this huge Wolverine mystery, but maybe that's the focus, maybe that's not, and that kind of irked me because it was like you were already trying to do sequel bait in an era where we don't try to do sequel bait.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I feel like the Wolverine mystery is ultimately a misdirect because the film doesn't want you to realize that the mutant Magneto is going after is actually Rogue. You know?
Yeah, that was one thing that kind of bothered me a little bit. They do the pronoun thing where Sabretooth comes and Magneto says, "What happened?" And he says, "They knew." Okay, where's the mutant now? And like, come on, you couldn't like. They play it so vague so it's a big surprise when Magneto later says, "Whoever said I wanted you," and like I feel like I don't know, this is just a minor nitpick, but like it kind of bothers me when it's like normal people would use dialogue like, "Okay, where is she?" Like they would say that instead of "Where's the mutant now?" I don't know. That's just a huge nitpick for me. Like it's not even in the top 100 things to complain about, but that's always something that's bothered me here.
Yeah, see, I don't know how I feel about it because I don't know how... We never get any information as to how Magneto knows about Rogue and her powers, and so it's conceivable that he doesn't even know whether Rogue's male or female, you know?
Yeah.
That occurs to me. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you're right. I never thought about that, but we don't know how he knows about her. That I never thought about that.
Yeah, because she's running across the country on her own, and so Magneto obviously knows that she has the ability to leech powers from other people, but, like, who she is and beyond that, you know, how is he figuring it out? And that's, like, right on the line between plot hole and mystery, right? So it's an interesting little line to walk there. But to get back to Wolverine... Yeah, I think it's interesting, though. I thought it was a cool choice to, like, kind of misdirect us, because Wolverine's origin is naturally fascinating. You know, they did a whole movie on it twice, badly.
It's not fascinating.
What?
Not the movie. That's not fascinating at all.
Oh, it's fascinating in a garbage fire kind of way, but, no, but, like, Wolverine's origin is really fascinating. We've done comics on it. We did a whole movie on it. We did a second movie on it because the first movie was bad. We've done all this stuff with Wolverine's origin, and so it's naturally fascinating. We as the audience are already pulled in by the world, and so we're even more pulled in by this really engaging character in this world who's got this, you know, really fascinating backstory. And so I thought that was a pretty clever misdirect, ultimately. Because... Again, I knew Rogue was the one that Magneto kidnaps in the end. I totally forgot why... Like, I totally forgot that he wasn't at all interested in Wolverine for some reason. That totally just escaped my mind. I can't really explain why. Maybe I just got a bad memory or something. But yeah, that twist really worked for me in a way that, you know, it was just cool to see.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, with the exception of that scene where Magneto, and you could be right, if he doesn't know anything about Rogue other than like this is somebody who can take mutant powers, then that scene works a lot better for me. Now that you've mentioned it, I'm kind of gonna always be bothered by how does he know about Rogue, period. But I do like that well, I don't know where. Oh, you were asking why does Wolverine kind of take center stage in these movies, and I want to say I've watched some of the special features on these movies, and I think it just came down to the group of people that were coming together to make these movies. They were all, I don't remember who it was that they had to pitch the movies to. It might have been Warren Schuler Donner. They just threw a bunch of X-Men comics at her, and I think she just latched onto Wolverine. And so I want to say that's kind of where he became the crux of these movies. And even by this point, Wolverine was like all over the X-Men books. So like he was a huge part of the animated series. He was in every X-Men comic coming out when this movie came out. So I think they liked the character, and also they realized that we'd be idiots if we didn't make him the focal point of these movies.
Okay. And I do like how he's portrayed here. You guys were talking earlier about, having Rogue and Logan be kind of a, POV character for the school. And God, I love the stuff at the school, especially with Logan just like kind of, walking around it, trying to figure things out, and especially seeing Rogue in class and just getting to see all the other mutants around the school. It works so well, and it really does, make you feel kind of engulfed in this world. Quick question. Hogwarts versus Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. The entire student bodies are going to fight. Who wins?
Ooh. Wow.
School rivalry.
I'm going to say Hogwarts would win because it looks like Hogwarts has a bigger student body than Xavier's.
Fair enough.
But so the only way to solve this would be like a college football game,
right? Right? Like that. Oh my God! There's your fan fiction. Xavier and Dumbledore like arrange a fucking like school sporting event, rivalry sporting event every year. That'd be hilarious.
Since we're on this subject,
and I'm magic.
I'm never going to get the chance to mention this again. A few months ago, I marathoned all the Harry Potter movies, not the Fantastic Beasts movies, just the Harry Potter ones. And I had this funny idea, I thought it was funny, of Professor Xavier and Dumbledore both meeting a young Wanda Maximoff and trying to recruit her to their schools. and I thought it was really funny, but I wouldn't be able to execute it at all. But yeah.
You should do that. You should do that in your little webcomic. Finagle a way to throw Merlin in there and shit. It'll work. It'll all work.
I'm looking outside my window. Someone's getting repoed. It's amazing.
That's too bad. Anyway, no. So like this using Wolverine and Rogue as the window into the school is really, really cool. I do think the weakest element, especially of the first movie, it gets compounded in the second and third because of how awkward it is in the first movie, is the love triangle between Cyclops, Rogue, Jean Grey and Wolverine.
Well, Rogue a little bit, because you can kind of see that she has a thing for him. He clearly sees her as like a little sister-daughter type thing, but she kind of has a thing for Wolverine a little bit. So it's almost a love, like, it's a big, messy love thing.
But that's been X-Men romance in general.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, just like the chemistry between Jean, like, what I feel like it's supposed to be is Jean's in a, committed relationship with Cyclops, and yet there's, like, supposed to be a natural chemistry that she has with Logan.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't buy it. I just cannot see any, like, besides, ooh, pretty people fucking is pleasurable, I cannot see any kind of connection between those two. And so it makes the whole, like, really awkward, it's supposed to be kind of like awkward romantic tension, but it's just awkward tension, really, really weird. Especially that scene where he's like, you gonna tell me to stay away from your girl? Well, if I had to tell you that, she wouldn't be my girl. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, stay away from my girl. Like, God, that scene's just oozing with awkward. It feels like it was from the Raimi movies.
And I feel bad because I really like James Marsden as Cyclops. I wish he got more to do in these movies.
Yeah, he does get kind of shafted.
And he is a great actor. You see him in, like, 30 Rock, and what was that movie where Amy Adams was a princess? Was it Enchanted or Ella Enchanted?
It was...
Yeah, I think it
was Enchanted. That's the movie you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay, so he is great in those. He is hilarious.
Wait, no, it's Ella Enchanted that he's in, Because Enchanted's got
No.
McDreamy from Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, he's in that too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But he's a fantastic actor. You wouldn't know it watching these movies because he gets about 4 lines of dialogue across the entire trilogy. So, I agree.
Mike's out of gas. Fill her up. That's a real... That scene works. There's definite tension between those two. But, man...
And I've never even been a Cyclops fan, and I agree that he gets shafted in these. I think...
I've actually grown into being a Cyclops fan, so I notice it a lot more.
And you were saying that there's... So, I think there's a lot of problems with this love triangle. I think, number one... These two, especially the first 2 movies, take place over the span of like 48 hours or something. Like, it's enough time that Logan has been gone on 1 tank of gas, right? So, like, there's not a lot of time that's passed in between these movies. And so, and then by the end of the second one, and definitely by the third one, they want you to feel like Logan and Jean are these, like, hopeless star-crossed lovers, but he's known her for like a week. And I just don't buy that either of them feels the way that they do about each other. Like, I feel like in the comics, a lot of times they talk about this psychic rapport that Scott and Jean have, where, like, no matter what happens, they are always telepathically linked. I feel like if they had done something like that, finagle some reason for, have Jean psychically link herself with Logan, maybe to save his life or maybe to pull him back when he goes into berserker rage or something. And then you could have these two, like, that could be the reason for their magnetism with each other, where they feel a connection because they're psychically linked, but then she's been dating Cyclops for years, and so she's technically in love with him, but she feels something for Wolverine also. I feel like that would have been a better way to handle the romance, because as is, these two meet and literally they're immediately like, starting to have kissy face toward each other, even though like they don't know anything about each other. They've known each other for a few seconds and they've already started flirting with each other.
It's just especially awkward because their first meeting, he almost kills her.
Yeah, or at least chokes her a little bit whenever he jumps out of the...
Well, maybe she's into that. I don't know, but like he almost kills her. Just like he almost kills Rogue. Like, seriously, what happens to Rogue was like a nanosecond away from happening to Jean. When he first wakes up, and it's just weird.
By the way, why do they have the strange dude that they found in a forest? Why do they have his room right next to the student rooms?
I don't know, man. They just trust him.
I guess. Like, I guess Professor X can just read his mind and say, okay, he's good. But, like, they've got his room right next to Rogue's room. Because he's, like, moaning in his sleep, and then Rogue walks right in to, I guess, wake him up and say, hey, you're having a nightmare. But that, like, every time the last few times I've watched this movie, I'm thinking, that's really weird. I would have, like, all the staff rooms and all the adult rooms on this side of the mansion and have all the kids on the other side. Yeah. Like, it's a big house. You don't need to have these two right next to each other.
I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, that whole, like, the love triangle is the thing that just doesn't function for me, really, on any level in this movie. Real quick.
And it keeps going into, like, into the Wolverine.
Yeah, I know.
Where, like,
I know, it's weird.
And it's still problematic.
Yeah, it gets even more confusing by the time we get to there, but we're not talking about the Wolverine franchise. Maybe another day. The film trilogy where all 3 entries are in separate continuities. Anyway, but like, before we can transition on and talk about X2, I want to talk about the CG, because part of the big sell for this was this was one of the first movies where they could do superpowers on screen and have it look, like, believable and not cheesy as fuck. You know, you go watch, like, the 90s made-for-TV Justice League movie, you can see how cringy superpowers can look on film. This one, the first movies that really sells the superpowers, and it does it in really nice, subtle ways, so that when you get, like, a big effect like Cyclops' laser eyes, it really works. It looks really believable and genuinely stunning. Magneto's power set is visualized so, like, just perfectly, like when he's walking around his evil fortress and like he's got the metal balls, and then the like when he's steals all the cops' guns and shoots the one guy right in the head, but like stops the bullet and is just letting it drill into his head, which is a scene that's like it's so immediately intense and fills you with so much anxiety you don't realize how stupid that cop is. Because there's nothing stopping him from moving out of the way of the bullet.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. Just back up slowly. When I was a kid,
although to be fair, if there was probably a chance, he was probably thinking, okay, if I move, he's probably going to put the bullet in my head.
Yeah, maybe, but still, like, it's just, you gotta really work to justify that. But no, like, the visual effects side of this is just absolutely fantastic for the most part, and I'm surprised at how well, like, 90% of it holds up over 10 years later. The one shot that's CG and is pretty garbage is Wolverine's little matrixy ninja flip around the Statue of Liberty's crown.
That's really bad. And here's the one that still pisses me off, and the one I'm going to say is, the lightning with the frog.
What happens to a toad when it gets struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
You guys know who wrote that line?
Who?
Joss Whedon.
Really?
Yeah. He wrote
the quote-unquote master
script
of dialogue.
Yeah, he wrote a script for this movie, and I think that line and, hey, it's me, prove it, you're a dick, I think those were the only two lines of his that actually made it into the movie. And he actually said that the you know what happens to a toad when you get struck by lightning, he said that was a bad line, but only because Halle Berry delivered it wrong. I think,
I can believe it.
No,
I mean,
she
not,
delivers that as about as well as anyone could.
I will say it's half and half. I don't like Halle Berry's Storm, but also that's not a Storm line. I don't think that's a line you should write for Storm. Like, that's just not a good line for her character.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a topic for some other time, like how most of the characters in the movie, well, I'd say half the characters in this movie are just kind of there. Yeah, it's not a great line for her character.
Okay.
But she couldn't have done much better with it.
Yeah. I do love it's me, prove it, you're a dick. Okay.
That was good, yeah.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
a good one.
By that, and then when he gives him the bird with his claw, and both Jean and Storm are like, boys, and Scott kind of laughs when he does it, and I'm thinking like, see, I would love to see the alternate reality where these two become buddies, where they're not, angry at each other all the time. I think that'd be really funny.
Yeah, I agree. All right, anything else we want to talk about with X1, or we want to transition into X2?
Let's go into X2.
Okay, yeah. Best X-Men film.
Yeah, I would say second best X-Men film, right behind Days of Future Past.
No, better than Days of Future Past. Arguably, it's probably not as good as Logan, but I like it more.
Well, okay, like this one is my third place if we're adding Logan. Days of Future, it's Logan, Days of Future Past, then X2.
Yeah, no, X2 is absolutely fantastic. It's so fucking good. This is probably like everything else, like, you mentioned Days of Future Past. You know why Days of Future Past is good? Is because it's trying to be more like X2. Like, everything about all the X-Men movies that really work kind of is established in X2. It's got everything good from the first movie. It ramps up so much cool shit in as far as the action goes. My favorite scene, it's weird. My favorite scenes in both the X1 and X2 films involve people in flying machines, because Mystique in the helicopter is great in X1. Fucking Storm with the piloting the jet against the other jets and the tornadoes and shit is so fucking amazing. It's insanely cool.
Actually, two of my favorite action sequences in the X-Men franchise are in this film, with Wolverine, slaughtering his way through the strike team, and the opening scene with Nightcrawler in the White House.
That's a good-ass one, too.
That's probably my favorite scene in this movie. the Nightcrawler in the White House scene.
Yeah, that's good as shit. Like, there's so many to pick from. It's such a
and
great
it's actually,
opening, isn't it?
And yeah, it is. But here's the other thing: why I think I like X2 on a whole, and this is for the action scenes. One of the reasons is because in X1, some of the fight scenes are really close quarters, and it does that whole annoying thing of like of not shaky, but it gets really in your face, and you can't tell who's fighting who. Here, everything's open space. You know, everything you can see, every sequence and everything, and with perfect editing and whatnot. I was like, oh, this is so much like because I watched them back to back about a week or so back, and I was like, man, it is such an improvement in these sequences.
No, it is. Again, to talk about some of the stuff, like, I'd never really thought about these connections, and it's really impressive to see how many of these choices are so purposeful in X2. We open, post-monologue, we open with the White House staffer showing the tour group Lincoln's portrait and quoting from the Gettysburg Address.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's so, again, to connect the ideas that Bryan Singer is trying to do of, mutants as the minority viewpoint, to connect it to the idea of slavery is really, really fascinating. And then, again, that's visual storytelling, because what happens directly after that? Nightcrawler tries to kill the president. Why does Nightcrawler try to kill the president? Because he's being forced to do so against his will. Like a slave.
Yeah, good call. I never caught on to that.
It's like, it seems so obvious to me now. I have no idea why it never, connected in my head when I watched these in the past. I guess I was just a stupid kid. I don't know, just stuff like that is really, really fascinating. So yeah, I really, really like this movie. It is hands down the best. Does it still have its problems? Yeah, but God, so much of it's better. Like, yeah, we were talking the action scenes a second ago. God, the Lady Deathstrike versus Wolverine fight is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I adore that scene. It's so well done.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that if we're going to look at other action scenes in here is the like you said, the Deathstrike one. I would even say the like how Mystique breaking into Stryker's base is also a really good one. And speaking of Stryker, man, he is such a great villain.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's great, but after this movie, I did not ever want to see him again. It makes sense. I know we're trying to steer clear of the other X-Men movies. It makes sense that we see him in Origins because he's part of Wolverine's origin. I didn't really want to see him again after that, though. He's
yeah,
good
I was kind of
here.
like, why do we need him? Why did he? That's the one thing I will have against Days of Future Past, where I'm like, did we really need Stryker in this?
Yes.
Did we really need to be?
We needed Stryker. Yes, because marketing. No, you're right. It's like, he is absolutely fantastic and so scary in this. And, part of what I think makes Stryker so unappealing in all the other movies is no one has the charisma of this actor.
No.
This actor, like, he's so deliciously evil. He's got, like, that southern charm to him kind of thing going. And, oh, God, it just works so fucking well.
And,
Yeah, because nothing good comes from the South.
Yeah, and again, we open this movie talking about slavery.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I'm from the South. I like to think there's some good from here.
Where do you think I'm from, Ruben?
Oh, I didn't know. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. I'm an idiot.
He's got, like, this southern drawl to him and all this stuff, and it just it works so well. It's like, I flew in attack helicopters in Vietnam. I don't need you questioning me, Kelly. And, like, it's so good. It's so damn good. He's such a delicious villain.
And in the same way that Magneto, you sympathize with him. And even, like I was saying, that Senator Kelly, you could kind of see where he's coming from a little bit in the first movie.
Well, it's more of a she this time around.
Yeah, and I mean, with Stryker, like, he's evil, but, like, he talks about how his son forced his wife to commit suicide. And so, like, he sees mutants as a problem because of a mutant, his wife is dead. So like, I kind of see, like, again, I can kind of see where he's coming from. Now he's taking it way too far, but I think it's great that they're giving him just an ounce of sympathy, making me feel a little bit.
Sympathy is the right word. I think you definitely empathize with him. You understand where he's coming from, but you don't condone it. You see the motivation, you see the seeds for what led him to this, but you can see that he's clearly gone too far. You know, and that's the thing. Like that's what makes him such a great villain, particularly against Xavier, because Xavier's whole thing is like, learn to control your powers, don't let them control you. It's about empowering mutants, and like that worldview completely disgusts Stryker. He's just appalled by the idea. He sent his son to Xavier for a cure, and he got back a mutant who learned slightly how to use his powers better. And that just disgusts him. And I love it. That shit works so well.
I would say, moving on towards the end a little bit, I mean, we can jump around if we have to, but I think my least favorite part of this movie is once you get to Alkali Lake, I think that it draws on a little long. Every time I watch this movie, I feel like you could cut 10 to 15 minutes from the last act of the movie, and I think you could still have a really excellent movie. I think that there at the end, it kind of draws out a little bit longer than it has to.
I think the fact that Stryker dies like 3 times is a problem.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, like Magneto kills his ass, and you don't need that scene of Wolverine throwing the dog tags, and you don't need the kid sticking his tongue out. You don't need that. It's so unnecessary. Though, like there's definitely a lot of stuff I feel like you could maybe trim. I don't know if you could straight cut anything, but I think you could trim stuff down a little bit. The one thing I would never want trimmed is the ending scene in the Oval Office. God,
really?
That scene is so good. I love it. You don't love that scene?
I love it.
I'm on the fence about it.
What's your reservations? I'm really curious.
Well, so the president signed off on Stryker busting into a school and kidnapping children and putting them in a near-death situation. So, like, this is a problem the X-Men have to deal with. I understand that. But also, the X-Men are walking into the White House and saying, like, we're going to be keeping an eye on you. Like, that seems a little, I don't know, Black Ops isn't the word I'm looking for. It seems, like the comic book series The Authority, where the Authority is like, we're in charge of this planet now, and we're going to be taking over if you guys don't run the planet the way you should be. It feels a lot like that. And I don't think the X-Men should be busting into the White House and telling the president, hey, you better do your job correctly. Even though he did just, like, basically indirectly he caused the death of Phoenix. So, like, I can understand that they'd want to go in and say, hey, don't be letting people like Stryker do stuff like this again. But at the same time, it almost seems like...
You're strong-arming him. Like, kind of like something Magneto would do.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
I can see where you're coming from, and that would be more of a problem if not for the fact that they show the president that he was manipulated by people close to him. If not for the fact that they give the president files stolen from Stryker's office that show that he orchestrated the attempt to assassinate him, all to try to get access to the funding to be able to perform a Black Ops mission on the school. If they didn't reveal that the president had been manipulated, I'd agree with you. And there's very much that line where he says, I don't respond well to threats. And Xavier says, this is not a threat. This is we stand at the precipice of a turning point, and we are offering you our hand. There are factions on both sides who see a war coming and have attempted to draw first blood. And we want to avoid that outcome. So, again, I would agree with you that it would feel like very intimidating. I think it's a really interesting political kind of allegory, though, because it is this immense show of force, but it's like... it's like showing up with your army and then offering the peace treaty.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, this is what it could be. I don't want that.
It's very much like a big stick kind of thing.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me is Saladin, I want to say the Third Crusade. I should have looked that up, but Saladin, he's got the ability to just completely crush this Crusade army, but he doesn't fucking want to, because, like, war and murder are bad. And so he's got his whole army there, and he's like, I'm ready for a fight if you're going to refuse any other option. But let me tell you, I do legitimately want peace. And so I feel like that's what it's come down to, is Xavier shows, listen, this is what mutants are capable of. You are within the realm of reality to be afraid that mutants will bust into the White House and kill you. But that is not what we want. We want to show you that we can. We also want to show you that's not what we want to do. And that's the thing that makes that scene work so well. Is it is this, it's very not MLK, but it is this really interesting thing of, Xavier's the guy who wants peace, but at the same time he has a black ops team of mutants that he trains to be very efficient fighting force. And so it's kind of embracing that contradiction.
From their adolescence. He teaches them since they were teenagers.
Yeah. So again, that element really, really works there for me. It is that we are prepared to defend ourselves, but we don't want to have to. And you stand at the point to where you can make the choice of what we have to do.
I'd say you've sold me on it. I will say that's a very good point. They probably should not have brought Nightcrawler, because that does look like, hey, that's the guy who tried to kill me like a week ago, and he's sitting here with you guys. Like, even though they're giving him the files, like, saying that, I would say, like, maybe leave Nightcrawler outside for this meeting, guys.
Fair enough.
Yeah, like, hey, wait a minute. Could you, hey, did anyone go, Kurt, how about you go stand outside for a bit? He might scream.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, to talk a little bit more about Stryker and more of the plot side of this. Is this one of the more convoluted supervillain plots, or does this one seem a lot more logical and direct?
I will agree. It's a bit of both for me, where it is like, okay, he built a janky version of Cerebro, but at the same time, it's kind of genius to use a mutant to power a weapon that's going to kill mutants, and what better weapon than Charles Xavier's brain?
Mm-hmm. I was talking more specifically about, like, manipulating the president by attempting to assassinate him. Like, I don't know what happens. I guess the president dying would have led to the same results. It would have just been the vice president that approved it. Yeah, never mind. That one works. But yeah, like manipulating the mutants, capturing Charles Xavier and Cyclops, beating the shit out of Magneto.
By the way, could you imagine the PR nightmare that would have been in the real world, having if someone found out a strike team was sent, not even if they were mutants, like a school was attacked by U.S. soldiers.
Well, I think that's the reason why it, the president straight says, last thing we need is a dead mutant kid showing up on national television. And it's the most, slimy politician kind of thing to say, so I really like that just because we've seen this president almost die, that doesn't mean we get to, in really any light, portray him as a good person. His concern when ordering a military strike team on a house full of mutants isn't for the death of children, it's how bad dead mutant children may look on national press. And that's really slimy, and I like it.
And I like that we get to see a subtle change in Mystique's character, because we don't get to see much of her character in these movies. We mostly just see that she's allied with Magneto, but in the first movie, she's helping Magneto try to murder a teenage girl. And in this movie, she's at least trying to prevent these this strike team from invading the school. She says, hey, this is a bad idea. This is a school, and then they're like, no, you be quiet. And then, like, when she goes in and is sneaking on his computer, and she sees that he has files on Cerebro, you can see in her face she's kind of scared. Even though the X-Men are her enemies, I like that she still sees this as they're mutants, they're fellow mutants, and this is a problem. And if this goes any further, it's going to be a problem for us, and it's going to be a problem for them. So I really like that she's not, like, that she still sees the X-Men as maybe not allies, but at least not necessarily always her enemies.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. That really works for it. I also really like the way that, they kind of team up here. Though there is one scene with Magneto and Mystique that is so fucking out of place and has always felt really awkward to me. And that's when they're on the X-Jet and they're, like, making fun of Rogue's hair like some high school mean girls. We love what you've done with your hair. Like, where this shit, like, were they just, like, was that just Ian McKellen, like, joking around on set and they just happened to catch it on film or something?
I feel like that's the... I actually believe that was the case.
I actually really I thought that was a really funny scene. I guess they just have to remind the audience, hey, he's still kind of a bad guy, so he can't just be buddies with them. He has to kind of be at odds with them, even when they're all supposed to be working together. And it looked like they were kind of playing it like Mystique whispered something, like an insult towards Rogue, and then he laughs and says, we love what you've done with your hair. So it looks like they're both being like you said, like high schoolers who are making fun of the new kid or something like that.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so out of place and feels awkward to me. If you like it, though, that's fine. I will say the biggest contrivance in this, I love Eric Lencher's escape from the plastic prison. Oh my god, it's one of the most brutal ass scenes in the film. And this is when, like, I'd forgotten that we straight saw Wolverine, like, stabbing guys with the claws. I always thought that, like, they cut away from it to keep that PG-13. But anyway, so when the X-Jet is crashing because it got hit with the rocket, where the fuck does Magneto come from? Like, he is in the best possible place right there. And he's just in the middle of the woods, y'all.
Yes. Hey, Mystique and Magneto decided this is a great place to have a campfire. And hey, wait a minute. Is that the X-Jet up there? Did they just get hit by a missile? I guess I better save them.
Shit? What the shit, Ledger?
Yeah.
He's just floating around. Like, I mean, to be fair, maybe they're in the same state. Maybe he heard the news. We don't know how long they're on the plane before the jets start catching up with them. So maybe he had time to start tracking them down. Maybe he knows the jet's metal signature. There's a lot of maybes, though. You gotta give it a lot of gimmies.
I think Magneto or Mystique, one of them is a practicing sorcerer. Like, based on he somehow knows about Rogue in the first movie, and he somehow is able to find the X-Men and save them here. Like, he's got to be, like, he has somebody who can see the future or something. Like, there's
you would
something
say
where
that he is like a wizard.
Yes, yeah, like a
Gandalf
exactly.
type or something, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, again, I don't want to get into the third movie yet, but it's funny because we introduce a pretty fucking useless character to just finally provide an explanation for how Magneto's able to know a bunch of shit that he shouldn't know. And, like, one of her and this character's, like, mutant power that's actually useful is, oh yeah, I can know about other mutants and find them. That's seriously it. It's so... It's like, yeah, you just did that the first two movies and no one even bothered to question it. Why'd you bother introducing this, like, wannabe Flash bitch? It's fucking ridiculous. Anyway. So yeah, there's that whole thing. What else? What else could we talk about with X2 that's definitely worth getting into? I like
you just don't want to talk about X3, do you?
No, we just need to fill a couple more minutes. I want to talk about the comedy in X2 because I feel it's handled reasonably well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a scene really early on where Lady Deathstrike, who doesn't have much of a character here, I think she was probably one of those actresses hired more because she's probably a good martial artist.
Well, Kelly Hughes, the actress who plays Deathstrike, she does know some martial arts, but she's...
Is she like an actress first?
Yeah, she was an actress first. Like, her first big thing was Jason Takes Manhattan.
Oh, really? I was much more expecting that to be like a what's his name, Ray Park, who played Darth Maul,
Tyler.
She was
Mane.
actually, Kelly Hu is actually like her first big thing was that she was like a prom queen, like a Miss Universe.
Okay.
Not why did I say prom? But yeah, she was an actress first, then kind of did martial arts next.
Okay, because just the way she's written and shot in this, it's such a like strong silent type kind of thing that I figured they maybe hired someone based on their martial arts skills and ability to look, enough like the character more than as an actress, because she's just got like so little to do as far as like acting goes. She's mainly just stoic and silent. But I love the scene where she's fucking like popping her knuckles and it's just the loudest shit ever. And it's so hilarious. Like, there's just that woman in the White House just sitting there looking at her in disgust because she has the loudest fucking knuckles to pop. And I always wondered about that. Like, would you be able to pop your knuckles if you had adamantium over your skeleton, or would that like negate the whole air flowing through the joints? I don't know.
Yeah, adamantium claws never make sense because like Wolverine's are like a foot long, but then like they're longer than his hand, but he can still bend his hand, and like she can still bend her fingers.
If they're in the forearm, that makes sense. If they're the same length as the forearm and they stop or bend at the wrist, that'd be fine.
Okay, yeah, good point.
It's the fucking katanas and Origins that don't make any goddamn sense.
Oh wow! You know what? I wish I could say you're joking, but you're actually. Yep, it was katanas.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that maybe this is something we could definitely talk about when we get to X3. But I think these movies, a recurring problem is they will take a character from the comics who has an actual personality, and they will just throw them on the screen in name only. Like, I don't necessarily care about Toad, and Toad, really, they didn't do anything interesting with him until like 1990, but Toad is in the movie and his name is Toad, but he doesn't do or say much of anything in the movie. And then Sabretooth actually has a character in the comics, and he has like a long-running feud with Wolverine, and they kind of tried to do that in the first movie, but he has like a few lines of dialogue. He has more lines of dialogue with Storm than he does with Wolverine, and they keep doing that in these movies. They do it with Lady Deathstrike, who also has a thing with Wolverine in the comics, and I'm not sure how much of a problem it is. Like, if you're not an X-Men fan, do you care that they don't really do much with Lady Deathstrike or Cyclops or Storm or Sabretooth or Toad? Like, do you care that these guys are just there and they don't have much character? Or do you think that they should have done more to bring those characters to life in these movies?
I think it's less of a problem in the first two movies than it is in the third and beyond.
It gets really bad starting with 3, but I noticed it just a little bit in these, but it definitely gets really bad with 3.
Yeah, no, it's definitely there in the first two. There's no denying that. Like, we get Kitty Pryde in the first X-Men movie. Like,
and in this one, too.
Yeah, and in X2. Wait, what's she do in X2? Where's she in X2?
She's on the bed and floats and like phases through when the soldiers.
Right. Okay, yeah, you're right. And then they recast her for 3.
They actually recast her in this one also. So
really? It's 3 different actresses play her? That's funny. No, but like, so you get Kitty Pryde in it, and she just kind of like shows up and is gone, doesn't really have much of character. But like, and it's weird. Like, I completely forgot Jubilee's in X2.
Yeah, and she's in X1. She's in the deleted scene where Storm is teaching the class. She's there right beside Storm when Iceman is making that ice flower thing in the first X-Men movie. It's
too funny. Like, it took till fucking Apocalypse till we finally got proper Jubilee on screen, and then she still does fucking nothing.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. It's like, it's definitely a thing in the first two movies, but in the first two, they're henchmen and they're background characters, and they don't make a big fuss about them. They don't try to act like they're going to be important characters to the story. X3's marketing is a big problem. So let's go ahead, wrap up on X2 real quick, and then we'll go into X3. Does anything else want to be talked about with X2? I'll just say real quick the effects that were really pretty good across the board, minus one or two shots in the first one, are almost perfected here. I have literally nothing to nitpick about the shots in the second movie.
Mm-hmm. I had one thing. It's a weird thing to say about something I noticed whenever I was listening to one of the commentaries. Originally, at one point, they were going to include Angel in this movie. He was going to be one of Stryker's experiments that was going to show up in the Alkali Lake scene. I still, to this day, I wish they had done that, and then they could have had Angel already be part of the team in the third movie instead of introducing him in the third movie and then not really doing anything with him. So anyway, I wish they had done that.
All right, and I fucked up because we hadn't talked about Magneto as much in X2, which is really important because this is the movie where he just says, "No, fuck it, we're doing genocide," and that's a big step for the character, and ultimately, it's so fucking justified. Like he stops literally by seconds. He stops the genocide of mutants. At that point. Yeah, there's kind of a point where it's like, no, humanity's awful. It's enabled this. He's kind of like right to try to strike back at it at this point. Not condoning genocide, but like if there was ever a case, X2 kind of makes it. If you stop a genocide by seconds, maybe you get to do the reverse genocide. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he planned the genocide. It's just like, I got everything set up for me.
I can definitely
reverse the genocide here.
I can definitely see where he's coming from, like his character, where he's coming from there at the end with that turn again with his character. But I've always wished that they could have done just one movie where Magneto doesn't turn into the villain at some point. Like in the comics, they're always like going back and forth. Like he was a villain for about 20 years, then he was an ally for about 10 years, then he was a villain for about 10 years, and he was an ally for about, 15 years all the way up to today. And so like they always are going back and forth in the comics, and I really wish they could have just done one movie where he's an ally throughout the whole movie. The plot of this movie is largely based on an original graphic novel called God Loves, Man Kills. And in that, Magneto is their ally till the end. And it ends with him and them basically having an ideological discussion where he says, I can't join you guys, and you guys aren't going far enough with this. And they're saying, you're going too far. You're doing things that we can't abide. And basically they all go their separate ways, and they're all kind of sad about it because they were able to work well together, and they all kind of sort of see eye to eye in some ways. And I really wish we could have had something kind of like that. But I can also see from a character point of view where he would not be like, okay, I'm just going to destroy this Cerebra unit and that'll be that. So I can kind of see where he's coming from, but I also wish we could have had him not do that.
Yeah. I think it's like I think this is where he's the most in character. This, like, everything, I don't have anything wrong with him. Even when he's willing to kill Charles, or let Charles die to do this, it's super fucked, but it kind of shows just that by any means necessary kind of mentality that Magneto has, and it's what makes him such a fascinating character.
Mm-hmm.
Dibblesville, you were about to say something?
I was gonna say, do you guys want to jump to X3 now? Because I don't know how much battery life I'm gonna have on me.
Oh, sure. Okay, X3.
What a great movie! What a fantastic movie! No, I'm sorry, I couldn't even do it. So.
Yeah, this one's 2006 was a bad year for superhero movies.
And it's all Bryan Singer's fault.
Yeah.
Well, that and Fox, because he wanted to do this movie, but he wanted to do Superman Returns more. And so they said, sorry, we really want X-Men 3 to come out, like, now. So they didn't want to wait for him. So it's half his fault and half Fox's fault.
Yeah. But then Fox could have gotten literally anyone else besides Brett Ratner. Like...
apparently, at one time, Matthew Vaughn was going to direct, and then he decided he didn't have enough time to do it.
Yeah. Just Bryan Singer is a great director, But
Brett Ratner is not.
yeah, he's really not. He's an asshole. We were talking about Kitty Pryde being recast for this movie because she finally had an actual character, and it kind of came out recently that Brett Ratner outed Ellen Page just on set because he's a dick. So that was nice of him. Just shit like that. He's such a... And then there's just... It's not like he's a dick, but he's talented. He's just a talentless dick. It's like that guy in school who's ugly and an asshole. It's so bad.
We could have probably spent the entire podcast just talking about everything wrong with X-Men 3. I think all of the problems that I've had with the X-Men movies since this movie all can be rooted here. Like every problem I've had where it's like, okay, this is problematic, it all goes back to X-Men 3. There's just so much here. Like this is why we've been in prequel land for the last 12 years, is because of this movie basically breaking the X-Men. Like we were comparing these movies to the Raimi Spider-Man movies earlier, and Raimi's Spider-Man 3 is an atrocity, but it's not so bad that it breaks Spider-Man. You could have done Spider-Man 4 after Spider-Man 3. I would not have wanted to have seen Raimi's Spider-Man 4 based on what I've heard that it would have been, but you could have done a Spider-Man 4. I don't see how you could have done an X-Men 4 after this, where Rogue is powerless, Cyclops is killed off screen,
Xavier's dead too.
Xavier's dead.
But his brain is in the body of a black dude.
Or it's either that, or it's supposed to be his twin, because they said that that's apparently supposed to be his twin who's been in a coma his whole life, and they don't show a clear shot of that mutant. But apparently
no. The whole setup, all right, is he's teaching the class, and he's like, this person's was born with no higher brain functions and has been in a coma his whole life. All right, there's no higher brain functions, just like. All his brain does is tell his body to work. Mm-hmm. Now, what if I, a psychic, were to put the brain of someone who is loved but is going to die into this body? Like, that's the whole premise. And then at the end credits, he's like, Minerva, Charles! Like, yeah, that's the whole premise.
It's his twin.
Well, if it's his twin, regardless or not, it's supposed to be Charles taking over the body, though.
Yeah. But by the end of the movie, your only X-Men are Storm and Wolverine. Jean's dead, Scott's dead. Beast doesn't join the X-Men. He becomes the ambassador of the United Nations. So, like, I have no idea how you would do an X-Men 4 after this.
Well, it's called The Wolverine. Or it's called Days of Future Past. Or it's called Logan. Yeah, it's really weird. There's no denying it. It does a lot to fuck things up. And what's weird is you can tell that there were some of the treatments of Singer's work in here. Like, there's just enough good left over from what he was doing. Like, I talk about the mutant girl that Magneto gets to kind of explain his plot contrivances away. And that scene's stupid. But the scene right before that, where the mutants are gathering to talk about what they're going to do to be taken seriously by the government and form committees and stuff, and Magneto just shows up and tells everyone, no, listen, you're fucked. Either join me or you're straight fucked. God, that is a great Magneto scene.
And I do love that scene where she's like, where's your mark? And he's like, I have one, and no one's going to touch me again.
Yep.
That's one of the best moments of this movie.
Yes, it doesn't take much. Like, and again, like, Angel cutting his wings off as a child in the bathroom when his father walks in. We didn't talk about the Iceman family scene in X2, but Debzilla mentioned Brad Singer's gay. I didn't know that, by the way. But, like, that connection to the homosexual experience, it's very, very similar. Like, Angel's... in a way, kind of what Angel's going through is kind of a parallel to the trans experience. So again, these movies all have things from the perspective of the minority. And that's really, really interesting, whether that minority be racial, religious, or sexual orientation. These are all handled really, really well. in different aspects. The Angel stuff really works for me. I can see that this was a patchwork of scripts. That scene where Angel refuses to take the cure because he realizes it's not what he wants, it's what his father wants, is a really, really emotionally powerful scene. And then it's ruined by absolutely terrible direction and choreography. And just, my God, that is the most awkward way for him to leave that room. It's like, yes, my shirt is off. Now let me run through the plate glass window.
And have 1,000 cuts on his body. Every time this happens in a movie, I'm just like, okay, now he's dead. He's going to have quite a bit of blood loss here in a minute.
I'm trying to remember the name of the movie, but there's a movie where a guy's like high and he just, without realizing it, walks through a plate glass window, and it shows you exactly what would happen to someone who does that. Like, he gets a sheet of glass right through his throat, and it's the only thing keeping him alive for a couple seconds. But he's like so in shock, he removes it, not realizing it, and he bleeds out. Like, yes, that's exactly how that should always go. Anyway, yes, there's that. There are a lot of really good little nuggets in here. I will say, like I said, in the first two movies, this whole love triangle really doesn't work for me. The post-Jean's dead aspect of it all, man, that works a lot better. Like, that's all on performance right there. The guy playing Cyclops really sells that whole, heartbroken, mourning lover kind of thing.
And then he
so
dies.
Yeah, and then he dies to go be a pointless character in Superman Returns.
Yeah, so apparently also Anna Paquin was, she and Rebecca Romijn were both in other movies while this was filming, which is why their roles are significantly reduced. The entire reason that Rogue takes the cure is because Anna Paquin was scheduled to do something else at this time.
I mean, it works. That's one of the few story elements that I think actually functions.
It's one of those things I can understand why she as a character would want to take the cure more than anyone else in these movies, why she would want to take the cure. But it also makes me feel like they're trying to tell teenagers that you should change who you are to be with the guy that you like. And
see, I feel like they were aware of that and in one treatment of the script, and that's why you get the scene with Logan where he says, "Don't do this because it's for some boy. Do it because you want it." And again, it's Rogue's whole character that she can't touch anyone. It's not just Bobby. It's literally anyone. She can't be intimate with anyone. And so I understand that.
I actually remember, I was reading this meme a while ago where it compared that whole scene where Rogue says, they got a cure for us, and then Storm goes, no, there's nothing wrong with us. And to which I remember the guy posting the meme says, get fucked, Storm. You have, you control the weather. You can control the weather. She can't touch anything. That's the equivalent of, oh, I can cure my chainsaw hands. Oh, no, there's nothing wrong with your chainsaw hands, said Johnny Five Dicks.
No, so that element of it really worked for me. And again, to connect it to the minority representation thing, Rogue, more than anyone else, you could argue Beast, but not much in this movie. They play with it a little bit, but not much. Rogue, more than anyone else, represents, I feel, the disabled community, as far as the window into the X-Men. I guess if you were trying to break it down, Rogue would probably be the disabled community's viewpoint of the minority. Storm and a bunch of the other characters that don't get a ton of screen time but are important would probably represent more the racial minority. Kurt represents the religious minority. You can kind of draw all these parallels. Bobby represents the homosexual minority, but not well because he's in a hetero relationship, and that's unfortunate.
Now, do you know, Ian, now in the comics he is gay?
That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Especially the way they play it in the movie. It makes perfect sense. But the way, especially in X2, the way he's got that whole scene where his mom says, have you tried not being a mutant? That's so and Singer's admitted that he's doing it directly as a coming out scene. So like there, you can really connect all these, and so the idea of a cure for minority, or the idea of a cure for racial disparity is something that has existed and is completely offensive throughout the history of the world. Basically, we can cure your blackness or whatever. That's something that exists and is offensive, and so Storm saying that in that context makes perfect sense. But I don't know, someone can't walk or whatever. Yeah, here we have a way to remove that disability. If they want that, yes. I guess the better comparison would be like the deaf community, because the deaf community has an interesting culture all its own, where by some weird definition it's technically a disability, but not really, because just if everybody couldn't hear, it wouldn't be a problem. It would just be a different existence. So like there's implants now for deaf people that will allow them to hear, and some deaf people want them because they want to be able to hear, and some deaf people don't want them because they're culturally deaf too. So it's an interesting conversation there, but yeah, there's this distinction with this idea of the mutant cure, and I think that's, again, there's a treatment of this script that was genius, and it just got fucked by Brett Ratner, who's like, yeah, I'm gonna throw in a YouTube meme that like no one remembers anymore.
It is kind of, it's gonna be a weird thing to say, but I do like the X-Men lineup in here of the X-Men team, even though it gets totally underutilized. I'm like, if that was a comic, I'd be totally fine with that lineup. I'd just throw in Cyclops and I'd be good.
I love Beast. God, Kelsey Grammer. We've talked about a lot of like great casting choices in these films. Kelsey Grammer as Beast is absolutely phenomenal.
It's going to sound really weird, but Kelsey Grammer is probably the reason why Beast is my favorite X-Man.
Really?
He's good.
It's from the performance, so...
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely sells it, and they so underutilize him in this. I love the deleted scene where he gives the big Shakespearean Band of Brothers rallying cry thing. God, it's so good. They should have left that in.
I think, yeah, he's probably my favorite part of this movie. But I think that, and there's a line, well, the Magneto talking about his tattoo, or the mark, from the Holocaust, that's really great. And then there's a really good moment when Pyro says, I wish you had let me kill Xavier earlier. And he stops and says, Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you'll ever know. I think that's a really good scene. It's undercut slightly by the fact that Magneto basically manipulated Jean into killing Charles, kind of, indirectly.
That whole scene is so fucking awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, God, I hate that scene.
I kind of like that they're calling back to the beginning of the movie when Charles and Eric go to her house, but it's weird that you've got the Brotherhood and the X-Men just hanging out outside, and then it's like, screw it, let's all have a fight. And so then Wolverine runs at Juggernaut, and it's just like, why? Like, both Charles and Magneto said, don't come inside. We're going in by ourselves. And then the X-Men and the Brotherhood are like, what? You said let's all fight? Okay, cool. And, like, I don't know. Like, that scene, you're right. It's awkward. That's the best way to describe it.
Well, not just that. Like, just the way it is shot is so fucking awkward. And, like, the one I go to... All right, so, again, we're not talking about the movies, but you remember in Wolverine Origins when he's first looking at his metal claws in the, like, farmhouse or whatever, and he, like, just kind of drops his hands naturally, and it just instantly completely destroys the sink, right? Like it's fucking butter. Alright, so in X3, they're in the house, and Jean's powers are kind of throwing everyone around like it's a fucking... like we're in Twister. And Wolverine just puts his claws up in the drywall. And so it's just the most, like, inconsistent ass shit you could possibly think of, because everything else about that we've seen about his claws leads you to believe that he should fucking slide right through that drywall like it's nothing. So there's that really stupid shit. And then, like, Magneto gets thrown into the other room, and it's just... it's the awkwardness of how silly... like, Ian McKellen totally sells that fucking costume, but it is a silly-ass costume. So Ian McKellen fucking sitting on the ground trying to, like, fight the wind as Jean pushes everybody away is the most awkwardly filmed shit. Brett Ratner is a terrible director. Just everything about that scene looks so incredibly awkward.
Give it to Spider-Man 3. At least some of the sequences are, there is some good sequences in there and good editing in there. And I can find a little more enjoyment in Spider-Man 3. In here, I just get infuriated every time I watch X-Men 3 because this has all the trappings of a good movie that got cut to pieces.
It has the trappings of two good movies. That's the problem, is that, like you mentioned at the very beginning, this is doing the Dark Phoenix saga and the Cure storyline from Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men. I think all they had to do is, okay, you've already set up the Dark Phoenix stuff at the end of X2. Just save that for X-Men 4. Just do the Cure storyline here, and then you can do Jean in the next movie. I don't think they needed to combine two movies into one. I think that was their big failing right there, is that it's two stories that they're trying to shove into one movie, and it falls apart hard because they did that.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, a lot of the stuff that's good about The Cure is good only intellectually. Like, the way they handle it on film is pretty awkward. The president kind of falls into the trap of making Cure-based weapons and all this stuff, and he doesn't realize the slippery slope he's on. Yeah, that could be interesting. It's handled to shit. Like, again, talk about really awkward, poor filmmaking. That scene where all the military soldiers are getting armed, and there's just, like, a general, like, calling off all the instructions the whole time. You never see the general or whoever's calling off those orders. That's there entirely for the audience to understand what's happening, which you shouldn't need, because everything that's you're seeing on screen should tell you the information that the guy is barking off. There's absolutely no reason to have that announcer other than just bad direction, bad visual storytelling.
And I probably could have, I could probably ignore the bad direction, or at least forgive a lot of it, if the story itself was just better. But there's just so many just basic story things, like not even direction, just like basic story things that, like, Angel has no purpose in this movie. He's there to be representative, like you said, of the trans community. But like in a story perspective, he doesn't do a whole lot. He's there at the beginning, and then he flies away, and then he comes to the mansion, and he's there so that he can hear the X-Men going to fight Magneto, and then he goes to rescue his dad. Like, this movie is so much like that. I was listening to a commentary of this where they said at one point they were going to include Gambit in the movie, and then they said, but we didn't really want to do that because we were afraid he wouldn't really have anything to do in this movie. And I'm thinking, that didn't stop you from including half the Marvel Universe in the movie. Like, there's so many characters here where I'm just like, you get rid of him. He doesn't need to be here.
Yeah, like, the one that pissed me off was Multiple Man.
Yeah, and he's a bad guy here. Like, why?
I mean, I will say, I do like the idea behind the Multiple Man scene. That was reasonably clever from, like, a Magneto tactician standpoint. It's handled to shit in the film, but it's a cool idea.
Yeah, but Madrox is a good guy.
Magneto's not evil. He is in this. Magneto's fucking ridiculously evil in this. He's such a dick.
I meant, like, the character of Madrox, like, he robbed multiple places. I'm like, no, that's not what Madrox does.
Okay. Anyway, Magneto's such an unforgivable dick here. Like, you talk about the Phoenix scene all you want. The fact that he just fucking like, oh, Mystique was cured. She's an ugly bitch now. Bye. No, Magneto would not do that. He's not going to fucking abandon his right-hand woman like that. He's obviously going to try to, like, keep her around and see if he can save her. There's no way you can convince me Magneto's not going to do everything in his power once he defeats the Cure to try to restore mutant abilities. I cannot possibly believe it. And it's especially inconsistent when he knows for a fact he can make a machine that can give non-mutants mutant abilities. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that would kill people at first? I'm going to do some tweaking on that, then I got your back, Mystique. We're going to get you back. Mm-hmm. Like, that just seems so fucking obvious.
Yeah. I feel like I'm trying to think of something else positive to say about this movie, and I'm struggling.
It's not a good movie. It's hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's so much that could have been good, but it's just like I was talking about this earlier. So the Cure stuff is really interesting in the conception, but it's handled to shit. The Phoenix stuff is pretty boring and typical in conception, but it's handled reasonably well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, say what you will, the scene where Wolverine goes to stab Jean at the end, that's pretty good. The way, like, you know, Xavier's talking to her about how she's letting her powers control her and it led her to killing the man she loved, that's pretty well executed scene. As far as just the acting and stuff goes.
Yeah. Again, that scene kind of hinges on Wolverine and Jean having this very hard-hitting romance, but they really didn't, and so like it's undercut a little bit by that, but you know it's acted very well.
Yeah, I don't believe it as far as the story tells. I believe the performance.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So yeah, there's stuff like that. It's all over the place. It's a poorly conceived film.
I will say, what do you guys think about Professor Xavier not being as pure and virtuous here as he was in the first two movies?
I mean, it's consistent with the comics. I still don't like it.
It is very consistent with the comics, but I also don't like it.
Deadpoolzilla? Thoughts, comments, concerns? Deadpoolzilla?
Oh, did we lose him? Did his battery go dead?
Says he's still here. Anyway. Yeah, no, I don't like that. It's stupid and dumb and bad.
And I feel like this is still at a point, you know, you were talking about like the history of superhero comic book movies. Like, this is still at a point where like superhero comic book movies were not yet willing to go that extra mile and be really weird and crazy like they are now. You have now, like, you're not going to have like the all black costumes and we've got to keep it grounded. We got to keep it realistic. They're just going to go all out with superhero movies nowadays. And I think if this movie came out now, they would have tried to have done something with Dark Phoenix being an evil space god.
Yeah,
we were just asking. We were asking. Sorry.
No, what was the question?
What do you think of Professor Xavier being not as virtuous here as he was in the first two movies?
Oh, it's garbage like everything else in this movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
But at the same time, I'm like, it's not too far because not long before we had X3, we had Deadly Genesis in the comics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually the year before. That was where he had an entirely brand new X-Men team to rescue the original team. They all died, and then he said, "Well, back to the drawing board. I'm going to go
fucking
get another."
Professor Farnsworth, motherfucker.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to talk about this before it gets irrelevant, but like, it's really weird because we do introduce this idea that Professor Xavier is a bit morally ambiguous and kind of like uses people and acts like, oh, I know what's better for you, yada yada, and that's fine. And then we like kill him like 20 minutes later,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like meant to be sad, but we just introduce this idea that he's really morally ambiguous, and so it seems like counterintuitive to like trying to give us a really sad, oh, what a great man die. Like, again, you'd feel like 2 or 3 movies stitched together here.
Yeah, and I think the only reason they have Professor X be responsible for like dampening down her dominant personality, they do that so that they can have Dark Phoenix. If, like I was saying earlier, if this movie came out today, they would have had this somehow be an evil space demon, and then it would have been a problem. But they wanted to have an, air quotes, realistic, grounded way of doing the Dark Phoenix story.
I don't know about that. We got what's Dark Phoenix coming out? Is it gonna be an alien? Do we have any plot details on Dark Phoenix?
They said that it's going to be it's just going to be part of her dark personality again.
Yeah, I've got like less than zero hope for that movie, so I don't know what I haven't even been paying attention to what they're doing with it.
Okay.
Welcome to everybody else.
Yeah, just, I don't know, something that's been on my head. No, you're right, though. It's just, it's such a fucking mess. It's just like everything in this movie. It's such a fucking mess.
And by the way, that scene where Professor X dies, he has this really weird smile right before he dies. Like, he turns and looks right at Logan, smiles, and then he's disintegrated. And I really don't know what's going on there. Like, is he smiling to say, like, everything's going to be okay? Like, yeah, I'm dying, but you guys are going to be okay? Because like, the last we saw between Logan and Wolverine, or Logan and Professor X, they weren't really on speaking terms. And now he's smiling at him like, oh, it's going to be okay. Like, I didn't understand that. I thought, and again, that's just weird direction.
Mm-hmm. It's really awkward. Can I talk about, like, this really awkwardly hilarious thing that has always bugged the shit out of me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in X3, Professor Xavier's fucking atomized Dr. Manhattan style, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then in X-Men Days of Future Past, or at the end of the Wolverine, he fucking rolls up to Logan at the airport like, sup, bitch? And it has always bothered the fuck out of me, because it means Professor X somehow reconstituted his body from atoms and yet didn't have the power to make himself be able to walk. That has always bugged the shit out of me. Like, if you're gonna do it, why wouldn't you just make yourself able to walk?
Or this is what would happen if it was like a robot chicken. Like, he reconstitutes himself and he's like, I can walk! And then he, like, accidentally slips on a piece of ice and breaks his back, like, immediately. And he's like, no!
Oh my god, no! He's like, oh my god, no! Oh, like the back, I felt the top of my shoes feel the back of my head on that one.
Yeah.
Yep. Just shit like that. I don't know. That always was like, it's again, it's to your point of how much this fucking broke the X franchise, that we're just never really going to get an explanation. And it just, alright, so I think we're about done with X3, and I want to transition to just a little bit about what the effect has been of these 3 films on the franchise going forward. Because every other time this shit's fucked up like this, we've just canceled the universe. Mm-hmm. Or whatever. Rebooted the universe. Amazing Spider-Man. Dark Universe. DCEU still holding on. I don't know why, but it is. Like, so many other times we've just said, fuck it, and we're going to restart the universe. X-Men held on, and they just was like, you know what? Fuck continuity. And it's so weird. Like, again, the Wolverine, the entire, like, crux of that movie does not function unless Logan kills Jean Grey. But that movie cannot be in continuity by the end credits scene of its own, of the movie itself. It's so fucking weird.
You mentioned earlier, like, this is a franchise where it's like every movie is in it, like, not just like, you know, the Wolverine movies are all in a different each movie's in a different continuity. By this point, it's like every X-Men movie is in a different continuity. Like, every single X-Men movie that comes out contradicts the one that came before. Like, you had at the end of X-Men Apocalypse a hint that Mr. Sinister was going to come in and he was going to somehow be involved with Old Man Logan. And then that's completely ignored. You had Caliban in X-Men Apocalypse, and then you have Caliban again in Old Man Logan, played by a different actor with a different voice and a different accent. And, like, these movies aren't even trying anymore. Like, they work well individually. Like, Old Man Logan's a great, or I keep calling it that, Logan, is a great movie by itself, but it doesn't work as part of a franchise. And that's why I've been, for a while now, I've just been really bummed out with the X-Men movies, because I want to watch these as a series, and it just doesn't work that way, and it hasn't for a while.
Yeah, it's really fucking weird. I just don't know what they're thinking. The joke I've kind of gone to is they've done a great job of adapting the continuity errors from the comics. It's just, it's fucking bizarre, man. Mm-hmm. I always kind of crack up just thinking about the timeline of the X-Men movies. And the funny thing is, like, Days of Future Past was supposed to solve this. That was kind of like the whole thing being marketed as, like, Days of Future Past was gonna, like, kind of resolve the timelines. And it doesn't at all. And as good as Logan is, it kind of shits on the happy ending of Days of Future Past, unless you just say, okay, Logan's an alternate timeline.
Yeah.
and that's what it kind of has to be. And I mean, love it or hate it, Deadpool solves the X-Men continuity problem. It's now like any kind of problem, like this whole conversation's moot because everything's been solved by Deadpool. That's just what it is. Like, why are the timelines fucked? Because Deadpool went around and just did a bunch of crazy ass bullshit with the time machine. There you go. Like, in a weird way, Deadpool's probably on some level responsible for Cable's future, and I'm gonna be generous and say Cable's from the bad future of Days of Future Past, but what the fuck ever. It's just a fucking nightmare of continuity, and it's all because of how bad X3 was.
Yeah. At one time, I actually had a way that I was able to explain all the continuity errors. Like, he's able to walk in X-Men Origins Wolverine, even though he's crippled in First Class. So my thought was, okay, the atrocity that we see in X-Men Origins Wolverine, that's actually a telepathic projection. And I'm like, okay, that works. But then, like, there comes a point where it's like, I can no longer, like, manage all of these continuity errors. It's just way too much, and you can't fix it anymore with clever fixes anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a telepathic projection that fucking flew the jet? What?
maybe Beast is in there, and he's like, hey, kids, what's up? I'm the Beast.
I'm a furry. Don't worry, I'm not a furry. Well, I am furry, but not like that.
I imagine Beast probably... Like, I can't remember what comic panel someone posted, but, like, there was an image of a bunch of mutant girls saying how annoyed they were because they couldn't use online dating because there were so many mutant fetishists on Tinder. I'm like, that would be a thing. You're totally right. That would totally be a thing. Okay. Well, we haven't done ratings, so let's go ahead and go on and do a score for each film and then a score for the trilogy. So I'm going to go first. I'll give X-Men 1 4 out of 5 kids that can run on water. I'll give X2 5 out of 5 knuckle pops with adamantium skeletons. I'll give X3 1.5 out of 5 super speedster mutants who had to have a power to justify plot holes that we didn't bother to care about in the first two movies. And then as a whole, I'll give the original X-Men trilogy it's 2 good, 1 bad. I'll give it 4 out of 5 schools for gifted youngsters. How about you, Deadpoolzilla?
All right. I'm also gonna go. I'm gonna go 4 out of 5 bad ninja Wolverine technique on the Statue of Liberty for X1. I'm gonna go 5 out of 5. Cyclops is horrendously underused out of 5, and 2.5 out of not even that 2 out of 5. No, I take that back. 1.5 out of 5. There we go. I feel more at peace with 1.5.
Yeah, me too.
1.5 ice beards out of 5. And on a whole, I'm going to give the trilogy a 4 out of 5. Could have been great trilogy.
Okay. How about you, Ruben?
Let's see. The first one, I will go 4 out of 5 Cerebro helmets. And then on the second one, even though I do think the last act kind of drags out, I will still say that's a 5 out of 5. Hold on. 5 out of 5. Dang it. We'll just say.
We're burning daylight here, Ruben.
Yeah, broken X-Jets. Almost crashed X-Jets. 5 out of 5 of those. X-Men 3, we'll say that's 1. I'll go ahead and go with you guys. 1.5 out of 5 cure darts. And then overall, I would say it's either a 3 or 3.5 out of 5.
3.5 out of 5. for the franchise. What's the noun here?
Average.
No, I'm. You did.
Oh, my thing for the franchise. Yeah, I guess 3.5 out of 5. Multiple men.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, that was a good one. All right. Well, Ruben, what are we going to be talking about next time then?
Okay, so last week we talked about villains turned into heroes, and I hope we can make a podcast, enough of a podcast out of this, but I was thinking we could talk about heroes turned into villains. And it doesn't have to be limited to comic books, because I feel like we'll be able to kind of get more of a podcast out if we can stretch it out to like TV and movies.
Sounds good.
that's what we did. That's what we did with comics, because we kind of jumped from there. But yeah, I'm down with it.
All right.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Sorry, you got
you're
great
good.
reception.
You're good. Anyway, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
I am the Don Juan of Comic Con.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.